On the afternoon of February 16, 2022, a Beechcraft 58 Baron crashed just seconds after takeoff near Davidson County Airport in Lexington, North Carolina. The airplane never climbed away. It stalled at low altitude and came down on Interstate 85, striking a tractor trailer. The pilot was killed. 2 people on the highway were injured. At first glance, this looks like a familiar story. A twin loses an engine after liftoff. The climb doesn't happen. The margin disappears. But that framing misses something important. This accident did not begin with an engine failure in the air. It began with 2 engines that were already compromised before the takeoff roll ever started. From the moment the throttles went forward, this airplane was performance limited, not because of weather, not because of weight, but because the engines were not capable of producing the excess power the airplane depended on. What followed wasn't bad luck. It was the result of thin margins, stacked risks, and quiet warnings that didn't announce themselves clearly. That distinction matters, because this accident lives in a space pilots don't train for very often. This is William, you're watching Black Box Analyst, and here's story of November 5-8 Lima Foxtrot. The airplane was a Beechcraft 58 Baron, operating under Part 91. It departed from Davidson County Airport in Lexington, North Carolina. The accident occurred during takeoff and initial climb. The pilot was Raymond John Ackley, 43 years old, from Charlotte, North Carolina. He was the sole occupant of the airplane. This was a personal flight, and it was the airplane's first flight after completing an annual inspection. Shortly after rotation, witnesses near the runway saw heavy smoke coming from the right engine. Almost immediately, that engine lost power. The right propeller was feathered, indicating that the pilot recognized the loss of thrust and responded. But the situation did not stabilize. Witnesses then reported smoke trailing from the left engine as well. The airplane did not climb normally. Instead, it remained low, struggled to gain airspeed, and began to descend. Within seconds, the Baron stalled at low altitude and struck a tractor trailer traveling along Interstate 85, just beyond the airport boundary. A post-impact fire followed. On the surface, this sequence resembles a conventional engine-out accident. A twin loses an engine after takeoff. The pilot attempts to manage the failure. The climb performance is insufficient. But that explanation only accounts for part of what was happening. The details point somewhere else. According to the NTSB final report, the right engine showed evidence of prior detonation damage. That damage had been identified before the accident and addressed during the annual inspection. A cylinder was replaced. What was not documented was a thorough investigation into why that detonation occurred in the first place. On the left engine, investigators found that the number 3 fuel injector nozzle was not installed in its cylinder. The nozzle remained attached to the fuel line, but it was not delivering fuel correctly where it mattered. That condition would not necessarily stop the engine from running, but it would reduce its ability to produce full, efficient power. Taken together, the NTSB concluded that the airplane experienced a partial loss of power on both engines during takeoff. That conclusion is central to understanding this accident, but it's also where the report reaches its natural limits. An investigation report can document mechanical conditions. It can identify what was found during teardown. It can determine probable cause. What it cannot fully capture is how those conditions felt in the cockpit, especially during the most time-compressed phase of flight. The report tells us what failed. It does not tell us how subtle the cues may have been, how the airplane behaved moment to moment, or how quickly performance margins disappeared once the takeoff was committed. And that's where the real lesson lives. This accident didn't happen in a clean, binary way. One engine didn't simply quit while the other carried the load. Instead, it unfolded in a gray zone, a space where engines are still running, instruments still look plausible, and the airplane is controllable, but no longer capable of doing what the pilot needs it to do. That gray zone is where we need to slow down and take a closer look. Most multi-engine pilots are trained for a very specific kind of emergency. One engine fails completely. The airplane yaws. The failure is obvious. The checklist begins. That kind of failure is loud, unmistakable, and easy to identify. Partial power loss is different. In this accident, both engines were still running. One lost power abruptly. The other continued to operate, but below its expected output. That is not a scenario most pilots practice often because it doesn't present a clean trigger. There is no single moment where the airplane announces that something has gone wrong. From the cockpit, partial power loss tends to look almost normal. Manifold pressure may still be in the green, RPM may be close to expected. The engine is smooth enough to feel healthy. What changes first is not a gauge, it's acceleration. Instead of the airplane leaping away from the runway, it feels heavy. The takeoff roll feels longer. The climb angle feels shallow, but nothing feels broken enough to demand an immediate reject. That is what makes this condition so dangerous. In a barren, the margins during takeoff are narrow. Key speeds sit close together. There is only a small window where the airplane is both controllable and capable of climbing. Being above minimum control speed does not mean the airplane can climb. It only means directional control is possible. Climb performance depends on 4 things happening at the same time. Drag must be minimized, power must be available, weight must be within limits, and airspeed must be precisely managed. Remove even a small amount of power from that equation, and the balance collapses quickly. This is where pilot expectation becomes a trap. Pilots expect that if one engine is producing power, the airplane will climb, even if slowly. That expectation comes from training scenarios where the operating engine is healthy and delivering full rated power. In this case, that assumption wasn't true. The airplane was controllable. The engines were running, but the excess power that becomes climb simply wasn't there. The numbers looked reasonable. The energy didn't. Safety guidance has long acknowledged this problem. Not all engine failures result in total power loss. Some failures are deceptive, especially during high workload phases of flight. Investigations repeatedly show that partial power loss after takeoff creates a decision trap. The airplane appears survivable, so pilots continue, even as performance quietly erodes. That is the heart of this accident. Partial power loss doesn't announce itself. It lies. To understand why this flight became unrecoverable so quickly, it helps to look at each engine not as a failure, but as a performance contributor. On the left engine, investigators found that a fuel injector nozzle was not installed in its cylinder. In a fuel-injected piston engine, each cylinder relies on its nozzle to deliver the correct fuel-air mixture. When that nozzle isn't doing its job, that cylinder stops contributing normally. The engine may continue to run. It may even sound acceptable, but combustion becomes uneven. Temperatures vary, efficiency drops. The result is not a clean loss of one cylinder's worth of power. It is a broader reduction in usable output. That distinction matters. Power loss in piston engines is not linear. Losing one cylinder's contribution often degrades the entire system. What the pilot experiences is an engine that runs, but never quite delivers what it should. Investigators estimated that the left engine was producing roughly 15% less than rated power. In isolation, that number may not sound catastrophic. In a barren, it is. During takeoff, excess power is what becomes climb. There is very little extra. Remove 15% from the only engine expected to carry the airplane, and the climb margin evaporates. Now add the right engine to the picture. The right engine showed evidence of detonation before the accident. Detonation is uncontrolled combustion. It is always a warning sign, never a standalone defect. It points to an underlying problem: ignition timing, mixture distribution, cooling, induction issues, or a combination of factors. Replacing a damaged cylinder removes the visible damage. It does not necessarily remove the cause. That distinction is critical in twin-engine airplanes. Twins are unforgiving of unresolved engine health questions. They rely on both engines performing exactly as expected during the most demanding phase of flight. In this case, one engine failed outright. The other was already compromised. There was no clean single engine condition available to the pilot. The airplane left the runway without a reliable performance reserve. Once airborne, there was no excess energy to trade for altitude, no buffer to absorb drag, and no margin to recover from even a small deviation in airspeed. This wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a gradual disappearance of options. From the moment the right engine lost power, the workload increased rapidly. The pilot was dealing with yaw, asymmetric thrust, configuration changes, and airspeed management, all within seconds of liftoff. At the same time, the left engine was not delivering the performance the airplane needed. The cues were subtle. The airplane was still flying. Control inputs still worked, but the climb gradient was collapsing. Low altitude removed options. There was no time to diagnose, no space to accelerate, and no margin to trade. As drag increased and climb performance fell away, airspeed decayed quietly. By the time the stall developed, there was nothing left to work with.